We got a really amazing mentor who is like extremely well known and also extremely like knowledgeable in the e-mobility sector, and we kind of like discussed with him, and I think that was kind of like the point where we were like, okay, this business model in these times, just like, this is not going to happen.
Electric vehicles promise a near future with a cleaner environment and a reduction of pollution. But its effectiveness depends on the people deciding to own an electric vehicle. Currently, the infrastructure proposes a challenge yet to be solved. There are not enough chargers for electric vehicles. Sarah Marie and her partner sought to solve this challenge by connecting EV charger owners with EV owners in different areas. Their initial business model focused in serve people who were traveling and needed to charge their vehicles. Quickly, their initial idea turned into a validated project with backers, investors, partners, and even users of the platform. Even though there was a pandemic, they managed to launch their project, thinking that lockdowns would not come back and travel would not be restricted. As we now know, this is far from the truth, and she and her partner had to make the hard decision after seeing the validation many founders seek to kill the initial approach and pivot towards a new model. Her story depicts how entrepreneurs can face pivoting by raising challenges that make them feel as if they are back to square one. This is going to be the last episode of the first season of this podcast. We will make a short pause to gather feedback, improve, and come back with more stories about founders who failed, how they overcome the hardships, and what they did to bounce back. So make sure to follow us for updates and bonus content we will release in the next weeks. Hey, I am Sam, your host, and this is Startup Fuck Ups. Hi, Sarah. How are you?
Hi, I'm doing great. How are you doing?
I'm doing great this morning, Monday morning.
Yeah, I mean, it is Monday. The week has started. It's very early, but it's fine.
It's fine. Yeah. All right. So thank you for coming here. Thank you for accepting to be here and to talk about your project and your failures and your pivots and what challenges you find in your path. And so I know that you have a background in marketing and business development. And I know that you are also developing Eve, which is a project to give electric chargers to cars. I mean, perhaps I'm paraphrasing, but why don't you tell me more about the project and you?
Yeah, I mean, I can start with like Eve post pivot. What we're now doing is kind of sorts of an Internet of Things solution that allows us to monitor and balance the load on the grid when a lot of people are charging their electric cars at the same time. Because obviously, you would, after the pandemic, use a car to commute to work or commute to somewhere, and then when you get back roughly in the evening, you would plug in your car again. And when many people, hopefully, because everybody is supposed to buy electric cars in the near future, starting now, when all of them plug in at the same time, it can be really hard on the electricity grid. And we want to make sure that like that is balanced, so there aren't that many peaks and like offsets. But we also want to ensure that, for example, in off-peak times, there are usually a lot of renewable energy sources used, and those sadly go to waste when nobody is using that. So we want to look at, with our solution, how can we automatically kind of like switch on enough chargers to then also use the cars to store the green energy, because obviously an electric car is only as green as the source of electricity. So we want to ensure that more people can actually really use their electric car to the extent that it can be green. So that's it in a nutshell.
And how does marketing and business development context end up doing an energy thing?
I mean, I feel like it fits in with my story because I feel like I've always kind of like stumbled into the things that I was doing. Very fun fact, and I think when people now meet me, they think it's unbelievable. When I started studying, I wanted to become an accountant, and I actually had an accounting internship set up. And but due to like the course of my studies and like the way it was structured, I also had to do an internship abroad,
Mhm.
and it was very difficult if you have no experience. And by that time I think I must have been still 18, so I was very young. I was like in my first year of college. I had probably absolutely no experience at all, so it's really hard to get an internship abroad. And somebody that had studied at my university was working at this company builder in Prague in Czech Republic,
Okay.
um, where they kind of like start startups and like MVPs for in collaboration with corporate clients, like really big names that want to outsource their innovation process.
Mhm.
Um, and funnily enough, the project that they kind of like put me in was in the automotive sector. So in the application, it said, oh, their previous expertise with like cars, automotive sector, or like knowledge about it would be great. And I was like, I mean, I like cars, but I don't really know anything about it, but I'll go for it. And that was kind of like how I stumbled into the startup world. Before that, I didn't have any exposure to that. And then I started working there, and it was a running joke with my colleagues where they were like, you enjoy this so much. Like, you're one of the people that comes to work and that like throws themselves in it, but you can really see that you enjoy it. And I had such a great time there. And everybody was like, how will you go back to Germany and start this accounting internship at this really huge accounting firm? And they were right, because they actually offered me to stay on the project and like run the MVP, and kind of like be involved in that like small group. I think we were like 3 people responsible for that.
Okay.
And I was like, yeah, it sounds like actually like a bigger opportunity to learn, and it's more of something that I see to do, or that I think I'll do in the future. And I called the accounting firm, was like, I'm very sorry, but I would really like to stay in that project. So this is how I turned from I want to be an accountant and spend my time looking at like files and numbers to I'm working in the startup industry. And then after I finished kind of like that project after a year, I moved back to Frankfurt where I studied at that time. And yeah, I continued to like work for startups or like small innovation consultancy firms, like in fintech, insurtech and stuff like that. But yeah, I was mostly in like marketing and business development. But then I went to Trinity because I wanted to kind of like use that course. It was a master's in entrepreneurship to kind of like go in with an initial startup idea, which was the very rough first version of Eve, and then use that course of study to like come out with a company or like an idea that could be brought to market. I then went to college in Ireland to really pursue that idea that I had, and to make sure that by the end of it, like you go in with an initial idea, and then at the end of it, the course is like structured in that way that you come out and you kind of like through the coursework have done any everything to then be able to kind of like bring that idea to market. So that was what I decided to do, because after working in the startup industry for like 3 years at that point, I was like, I really want to try and do my own thing.
Mhm.
So that's what I did.
Okay, that's really great. Such an interesting story. And I'm really curious, what was that thing that made you fall in love with entrepreneurship? I mean, because that 180-degree from accounting to entrepreneurship. And I mean, entrepreneurship is not, it's fun, I can tell you, but it's also hard.
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
what was that thing that you fell in love with?
I mean, I think it was also like the being exposed to like that environment for like the first work experience, but I felt like it was a lot more open to like people and different types of people, and you can really like use your creativity, which was one thing that like I was drawn to. I remember on my first day, like from my internship, I walked in and the receptionist is a girl that I'm still in touch with, and she wears full on golf makeup and like full on golf clothes, and she was the receptionist at this company. And I was just like, that is like I like an environment where people can really be themselves and just like be who they are and use that. And then I don't know. I feel like with entrepreneurship, it's obviously hard. I mean, I've learned that now with the journey with Eve. It's not all like fun and games, but it's like you kind of do different things every day, and no day is the same. And that's kind of like what I really started enjoying about it is you have all these different areas that you can kind of like learn while you're doing them, but also like put yourself into, so you're not stuck to, for example, just accounting. Yeah, that's something that I really enjoyed. And then I obviously learned about this problem on the market, and I started getting a little bit obsessed about it. And I was like, hey, I mean, I feel like somebody should do something about it. And I really want to like try. So this is kind of like why I decided to do it.
Great, great. That's really great. Yeah, in my perspective, for me, it was really clear from the initial moment in my professional career that I wanted to pursue entrepreneurship. But I can tell you that is the that I fell in love with the thrill of and the adrenaline of building things and testing things, and as you said, the creativity, it's just get exponential, and I really enjoy that, and definitely lets you be free and lets you
Yeah.
and be whoever you want to be.
Yeah. And I mean, I feel like kind of like in the startup industry or even just like in the entrepreneurial industry, like it's a lot of very interesting people that you get to meet every day. And I like the way people work with each other and people are from their personalities, where I feel like if you work like a 9 to 5 job, it's a little bit different. And here I just like how like the passion of other people like drives you as well. I think that's like the most important aspect of the community. You can really like leverage other people's passion and creativity to like fuel you as well.
Definitely, definitely. I mean, that's really great. And now you are just finishing up this degree in Trinity College, where you want to test and validate. And tell me more about the context in which Eve is born.
Yeah, so it started during my undergraduate degree. I mean, I was always passionate about, because at this time, even though like Greta Thunberg wasn't like a household name yet, and the Fridays for Future movement wasn't even born, but like there was still a lot of people and like still a lot of talk about sustainability and how to like preserve the planet, and that was something that I was interested in. Um, and by that time, kind of like electric cars were coming up and up. And during like the initial project, the MVP project I was involved in, which was in the automotive industry, like I got to learn a little bit about electric cars from the people that I worked with. And I was like, that concept is actually really interesting. And also it was mind blowing to me how somebody could just go out and be like, cars are run by fuel. I'm just going to build cars that are run by electricity. So like that whole concept behind it, I thought was super interesting. I mean, the concept of electric cars is super interesting. And like by that time, it was like initially coming to Germany. Um, and my dad was looking into buying a new car, and he was also really interested in electric cars. So he actually, this must have been like 2.5 years ago, he really wanted to buy an electric car. But the more we looked into it, the more we realized kind of like the charging infrastructure was just, it was just wasn't great. And he used to travel a lot for work. Obviously now he doesn't, but so he would have had to take his car to like business trips. But if you can't really charge, like what would you do with that car? And sadly he made the decision that like it's just not the right time for him. And I was like, well, that's a shame. And we kind of like in the meantime talked to a lot of like family friends, and I talked to people that I knew, and I realized like that part of like, I want to buy an electric car and I'm interested in that, but the charging infrastructure just doesn't even allow me to buy it. I found that very insane. Because I thought, why not empower those people to actually make the decision that they want to do? And that is kind of like where I started looking into and how Eve was born, where I was like, how can I make the charging infrastructure better to give people the freedom to make the choice to use a greener car or to use a greener form of mobility.
And that's really, really a great point that you were focusing on, because recently I was watching a startup pitch competition, and there was this startup called, I think it's Spark Charge. And
Mm-hmm.
I think
Yep.
I don't know if you know about them.
Yep.
But yeah, so they were tackling the similar problem, because the infrastructure limits the ability to charge your car and the range that you get on the car, and how you define that. And I think their solution is really the other way around. They have like this power banks where you can take in your
Mhm.
car and you can just plug your car with like it is like a big battery that you just
Yeah.
plug into your car, and you get it. So I think this is a big problem that in the future we need to resolve to actually make the change, because I know that the UK and France is banning gasoline cars in like
Yeah.
10 years or something like that.
Yeah, I think it's almost every European country.
Mhm.
Like I think it differentiates, like they have like a timeline between like 2030 and 2035 where a lot of them are banning sales. But obviously that's, I mean, 2030 is in not even 10 years, that's 9 years. And how do you want to ensure that people are not scared to drive that car if you don't have the infrastructure?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Definitely. All right. So you have this exposure to electricity and electric vehicles, and you are seeing this problem, you're asking your friends. Then what is the next step? What comes up next?
Yeah, so I mean, kind of like the initial context that I had and what where the idea was built off was people are afraid to buy electric cars because they have like range anxiety. That's how it's actually called. It's you're afraid that your car, because obviously the battery at this point isn't evolved enough, or let's say like 2 years ago, the battery wasn't evolved enough to do like very long term trips. So you would have needed to charge frequently. And obviously, since people know that the infrastructure isn't the greatest and they're not familiar with it, charging is a completely different experience than just going to your gas station and like fueling up your car within 2 minutes. And gas stations are so prominent, and you know where they are, whereas charging stations, like they're usually a small station somewhere, so people first of all like need to know where they are and locate them, and then they obviously aren't enough. So that was like the first big chunk that I based the project on. And then the second big chunk is if you actually have an electric car,
Mhm.
most people, or like I'd say like 95% of people, if you live if you don't live in a city and you have a like driveway or a garage, they have a home charger. It's the same with my parents now because they actually yesterday bought an electric car,
Okay.
and they're going to set up a charger in our driveway.
Okay.
So people have these charging infrastructure data at home, but because it's for your car, and you only usually charge your car up over the night, um, these chargers are usually free 70% of the time. So with the chargers that are at home, like this is an existing part of the charging infrastructure that is private, but it's still there and it's unused. And most chargers at this point are still at home. So the ratio of commercial chargers versus private chargers is a lot, like they're more private chargers than commercial chargers. So I was thinking, why not leverage these chargers to ensure that people just have a bigger network to rely on? So that was the initial idea. So it was kind of like a sort of rent out your home charger, kind of like an Airbnb model, but it would have been integrated into the commercial charging infrastructure. And I was kind of like, when I went to Trinity with like this very obviously, now looking back at it, it was a very rough draft
Mhm.
of a business idea, but this is kind of like how I went into it. And I did a little bit of initial market research before I went to Trinity, and before I started my degree, but like it really started, like the real work really started like in 2019 when I
Okay.
started studying.
Okay. So you now seen this problem, you've done some market research, you go into Trinity College, and then what is your plan? What were you seeking to accomplish? You are trying to make this free time from those home charges for people to actually earn money,
Mhm.
and and to also empower the infrastructure for the electrical vehicle. How did you see that happening? How are you going to accomplish that?
I mean, I initially went into Trinity and I wasn't that set on using that project or like going and kind of like working on that project, but I was like, this is a kind of like an idea I have. I'm passionate about it. Let's see what happens. Let's see if there's maybe other people who are working on something similar or kind of like in the same area. But I was also open if, for example, there was another project that like in the beginning of the course or during the course I would realize that might have bigger potential. I would have loved to be involved in that. But yeah, I mean, the timing was right. I met my co-founder there, Juana, who is currently in Berlin. We're both working remotely, and we actually haven't seen each other in almost a year. So we only see each other on Zoom, even though we're in the same country. But I'm pretty sure a lot of people have the same problem. But it's fine, it works. So I met her there. Um, she came to Trinity after she already had 10 years of work experience where she was in product management. So she had more of like a product angle
Okay.
and a development angle, even though she's not a developer. But we met up and kind of like the background worked and our passions worked. We were both interested in sustainability, but we also had a passion for cars and the automotive sector. And her background or the idea why she joined Eve, or kind of like she wanted to work on that idea and pursue it, is she's originally from Bucharest, and Bucharest is a city that sadly doesn't have the greatest public transport, so everybody's using their cars. And Juana said she experienced like levels of really bad pollution in the air, and she kind of like made it her goal that she wanted to work on something that could also resolve that problem and ensure that not just in Bucharest but in cities worldwide, or just worldwide, kind of like air pollution and pollution by cars is going down. um, so that's how she joined the team. And then I think our like first initial like milestone or goal was get into the Launchbox Accelerator program, which is powered by Trinity College Dublin. So each year they take in 10 teams, and over the summer they run a 3-month accelerator program, and you get, I think it's around like 10K that you get in funding to pursue your idea. So that was the first kind of like milestone for us, where we said, okay, we're going to work and kind of like get it ready to apply for that and get it ready to pitch and hopefully get in. But it was like the first make it or break it point. So we said, okay, if we get it in, and if people actually, because you pitch in front of a panel of judges and you have like a 3-step application process. And we said, if people actually believe in this, even though it's a very rough idea by these 2 students, that obviously haven't built anything so far, but it's just the pitch of the idea. If people believe in it, we're actually gonna try to pursue this full time, like at the same time as like finishing up the master's degree. So that was the first point. And then we got lucky enough to be one of the 10 teams that got into the accelerator program. And by that time, COVID wasn't a thing yet. So there weren't any lockdowns. So
That was in the summer of 2019.
it was actually beginning of last year. So we had our pitch in February. We got accepted. And then in the 2 weeks after that, like we didn't even really have time to celebrate or to process like what a big step it was for us, because the 2 weeks after that were absolutely crazy. Ireland was one of the first countries to go into lockdown. So they were really proactive. And I was in Ireland, and my family in Germany, they were like, nothing's really happening here yet. Like, what's going on over there? And Ireland didn't even, I think they had 1 case in the country, and universities shut down and schools shut down and everything. And yeah, and then a week later, Germany was announcing that they're going to close borders and flights were canceled. So I was rushing to try and get out of away from the island.
Okay.
Because as much as I enjoyed like being an island in Dublin, like I think being locked down on an island and also away from your family and also friends, because most people I knew were expats. And I was like, I think it's a good idea to go home. So that was kind of like a break in the timeline, where it was like try to figure out the new normal, like sort things out. And yeah, and then we obviously still had like online school and assignments, but the great thing about the program was we really could use all the assignments for Eve. So for example, we had like a marketing assignment where it was like create like a social media strategy and a marketing strategy for you go to market. So we did that. We had like financial planning. So as soon as we knew we were kind of like set on that idea, Anna and I, we actually just like shamelessly used the entire master's program to like get ready for the go to market, because obviously why not, like it's an efficient way. So yeah, and then in like May the program started, and at the same time we were also writing the business plan as a dissertation. And I think by that time we kind of like had the initial plan for the initial concept like set up how it was going to work. So initially we thought we could launch in September of last year, and we had started kind of like prototyping and also interviewing people. We were really lucky and had a couple of partners that said that we could use their commercial chargers, so they would be part of our platform. We had some very innovative charging solutions that asked us, that reached out to us asking if they could kind of like could put their chargers on our map. And then, yeah, our initial plan was kind of like launch the product, have a 3-month test with 100 EV drivers. And by that time, like before that and over the summer, we actually signed up people
Hmm.
for the test. And then after the 3 months, we wanted to roll it out in Ireland for every EV driver there. And then by this year, so 2021, we would have actually like expanded to continental Europe and went to Germany. So we had an ambitious plan, but then obviously COVID came in the way. Lockdowns were prolonged or were like reinforced. So that was kind of like something that we didn't really anticipate. And obviously in a time like that, nobody really knew what was happening. Yeah, so that was kind of like the initial plan that we had to really like make this come to life.
And that is really really great, because I think that every entrepreneur needs to have this initial plan to accomplish those milestones and
Yep.
those quick wins that will let you move forward, because it's a like a quick win game. It's for the long term, right? And I'm
Yep.
interested in knowing how did you envision Eve to be in 2022, for example? What were you thinking that you could accomplish if everything went the way that you were planning?
Yeah, I mean, Oana and I, we were always kind of joking, because you're kind of like young and naive and you see, but we were always like, so our goal is like have like really strong growth, have at least like 3 countries or even more in 2022. We were like, we want to become a unicorn, and then we were like, maybe Tesla could acquire us. So we were always talking about like these things because obviously you were super excited. But then all jokes aside, I mean, success for us would have been that we had a significant user growth, and not only we would have had an impact with existing EV drivers, because our plan was like within 5 years become like the number one charging app on the markets that we were in, to really ensure the product hits the sweet spots for the users that are using it and really solves the issues. We also wanted to make sure with the chargers that I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think our number was kind of like expand the charging infrastructure times 10
Okay.
by bringing in the private chargers. That was kind of like something that we calculated and looked into what was possible. So that was something that was like one of the milestones to success for us. But we also kind of had like a different part of success, which was we really wanted to see that by what we're doing, that we could accelerate the adoption rate of electric cars. So if we could have, even if it was just like a small percentage number, but if we could convince more people to drive an electric car and to use e-mobility, that would have been like a really big part of success for us. So we're kind of like the 3 pillars, or the 3 milestones we were trying to work towards.
All right, I understand. And in that, through that plan and that execution, what were the challenges? I mean, you had this idea of what success looks like,
Mhm.
and you're moving towards that, you're getting to that. And I mean, lockdowns was one of the first challenges to overcome. But then what were other challenges that you find in your path?
I mean, essentially, we were going to be a multi-sided platform, so that comes with its own challenges from the beginning. So, kind of like figuring out what I call the chicken and egg problem. Kind of like how do we get like both sides to kind of like start using the platform simultaneously, because it doesn't make sense having all these people with these chargers on the platform if they aren't drivers, but then on the other hand, we wouldn't get drivers if we wouldn't have any chargers. So we kind of like had a good plan, because we said, so like initially our first customer group, like the EV drivers, the testers, and then like the initial adapters, they would also have a home charger. So they would kind of like be both parts of the platform. So they would have been our initial focus. And then we wanted to start with like chargers in small businesses or hotels or restaurants, who really have like the incentive for also people to come and use like their facilities, and due to their size, they would have been easier to manage. And then we also had a partnership with like one of the biggest charging providers in Ireland through a mentorship that we had. So they would have been integrated later on. And then there are other startups who kind of like create this one integration solution where you get roughly like 90% of all commercial charging infrastructure with one integration. So that was kind of like the plan to fill out the platform.
Mhm.
But then at the same time, kind of like, I think a big part was also managing studies and then also finding time to still work on the project, because even while we were working on Eve while doing our assignments, you obviously still have to use time to like talk to people, do interviews, also kind of like create mock-ups or like a clickable prototype and test that with users. It's kind of like, I think that's something that obviously, I think when you're new to like the startup world or to running your own startup, kind of like the time management is difficult, because a lot of things take a long time because you need to test it and you need to make sure like it really figures out, like works out. um and then yeah, we were also just a two people person team. We're still only the two of us. We obviously like have mentors and people that support us, but like the core team is still the two of us. So
Mhm.
that's also like figuring out like how much can the team do, and then like who needs to be brought in externally to make that happen. So yeah, but I think our biggest like issue that we were looking at
Mhm.
was how do we get the users on the platform, but we had figured out something for that. And then there were like minor issues, which also kind of led us to pivot,
Mhm.
that we were looking at. For example, like in the charging world, the unit economics aren't that favorable because the margins on charging are extremely small. So like the charging providers only make a couple of cents per charging transaction. And that was obviously something, and that kept bugging us. But we were like, as long as we're making a positive impact, um, we can live with like small unit economics.
Mhm.
But obviously in a time when then the second wave of lockdowns hit and lockdowns were prolonged and people actually don't go outside to charge their car, that is obviously difficult if your entire business model is really focused on people traveling, people charging their cars outside. But yeah, so that was something that we looked into, but we always had kind of like a positive response from investors, also from EV drivers, and from kind of like a partners we had acquired, that we were like, this is something that obviously needs work and we need a large user base to make this work.
Mhm.
But by the positive impact that we, or like the positive response that we got, like made us believe that even with these slightly unfavorable unit economics, we could actually like grow this and make this work.
Yeah, at the same time, you're facing these challenges that perhaps every entrepreneur might face, but at the same time, there's a pandemic going on, and I do have to tell you that to congratulate you to be able to move forward through all of this madness, because in my experience, when lockdown started, I completely froze at some moment, and I was not able to work on anything. So for me to overcome that was really, really hard. So let me congratulate you, because even with the pandemic going on, that you still move forward with your studies and with the project, that is really, really powerful.
I mean, thank you. I mean, it wasn't all that great, obviously. I mean, I'm pretty sure I had my fair share of like breakdowns where I'm just like, because while you try to focus on your work, you still like, whenever you opened the news, it was just like pandemic, everything is terrible. And at one point I was like, I obviously want to stay connected to what's happening,
Mhm.
but the amount of news and like the, obviously during a pandemic the focus will be on it, but I was like, I just like, at this point the more I hear it, and I don't know if it was the same in Spain for you, or for, I don't know, from your home country, whatever type of like media you consume. But here there were so many different types of experts, and I felt like at one point everybody was becoming an expert per se. So I was just like, I just want people to like stop like giving all of their opinion, which is like one side, and then the other side is on that, and then people were like, oh, the lockdown will be going on for 3 years. So I think, like in that sense, what I want to say is I think work was actually like a benefit or a virtue, because I could push myself into that.
Mhm.
And I had something where I was like, this is important and I need to focus on that. And I'm pretty sure if I wouldn't have had that, I would have been an absolute mess. I mean, I still was a slight mess because like times were super uncertain, but then at the same time, I'm pretty sure like everybody that just managed to get through 2020, like props to them. Like they should all pat themselves on the shoulders and be proud of themselves, because I mean, honestly, I don't even know how we all made it through this year. It was a mess.
Yeah, definitely. Crazy times, crazy times. But okay, listen, here we are, and speaking about
Yeah,
this, and yeah, so then this lockdowns and this challenge actually made you pivot your initial business model
yeah,
in a really interesting way. So why don't you tell me more about how did that happen? I think you told me that you launched and then lockdown started again, but tell me more about it.
Yeah, so I mean, we by the end of like August, beginning of September, we had done like all the initial user testing that we wanted to do. So my co-founder had built like this really amazing clickable prototype that looked like an actual app.
Okay.
And we sat down and we tested it with so many EV drivers, but also people that were from the industry. Um, so we really knew that what we were doing was like a good thing, and that people were excited about it. Like I said before, we had initial, I think we had around like, without even doing any strong advertisement, we already had 35 of the 100 initial users that we wanted for a launch signed up.
Mhm.
um, and then we used this development agency. So obviously we started investing in the project, and it really came to life, and I started building the app.
Okay.
um, and then we were already kind of behind on the schedule because like the lockdown was a little bit prolonged in Ireland, the country where we originally wanted to launch. So we said, okay, instead of launching like September, October, we're going to push it to either November or early December to make sure that people are like out of lockdown. And then like the Christmas holiday winter period would have also been super favorable for us because usually people travel a lot to see their families. um, but yeah, during, we kind of like finished the first stage of development. So we had all the designs ready. They kind of like already worked on the back end.
Mhm.
And then, because I mean, I think we could have like thought about that, but obviously who knows what's happening in a pandemic. But then it started to get colder. People started to meet inside, like the virus spread more and more. Um, and like one country after another went back into lockdown, and a lot of countries said we can't really even give a timeline on the lockdown because like the cases are just so high. And at that point we were like, okay, does it make sense to wait? But what would we do in the meantime? Because obviously like you need to start at some point and you need to like grow users, etc., etc. So that was something that we had considered. Should we just push it back? But we realized like that obviously wasn't going to happen. And then like our second thought of pivot was, can we just move to another country, maybe another country with like a less strict lockdown, or a country that doesn't have that high cases? But all of our network and all of our established partnerships were in Ireland, so that wasn't good either. And then yeah, I think we had a discussion with one of our mentors. We actually got accepted in a Silicon Valley based accelerator program with the initial idea, and through that we got a really amazing mentor who is like extremely well known and also extremely like knowledgeable in the e-mobility sector. And we kind of like discussed with him, and I think that was kind of like the point where we were like, okay, this business model in these times, just like this is not going to happen. And that was what kind of like led to the pivot. But yeah, by then obviously we were kind of like back to square one because we were so focused on the initial idea that at one point you kind of like you narrow down your viewpoints so much that you don't even really get the rest of the market. So I think it actually took like a full month for us to kind of like pull ourselves out of like the business model and go back in with fresh eyes. And we actually spent the time up until January just interviewing so many different players in the market, kind of like all different stakeholders in e-mobility, like people like the car manufacturers, CPOs, charge point operators, the hospitality industry, like EV drivers, other charging apps. We also like talked to people involved in smart city to just really understand everything from the angle. And I was kind of like, I think our pivot was, I'm not sure if this is happening to everybody because I feel like sadly not enough people talk about that they're pivoting. Um, and I definitely wished I had more people like to read their pivoting stories, because for instance, like it's not like a one thing where you just turn 180 degrees and you continue going. It's more of like a, you turn to the side and then you realize, oh, that it doesn't work either, and then you turn back, and then you kind of like you take like one step forward, two steps backwards, until you eventually like reach a point where you're like, oh, this actually makes sense, this is where we should pivot.
Mhm.
So it took us, I'd say almost like 3 months and numerous interviews to like focus on the area that we are on. now. And then we had more interviews to really narrow it down and kind of like build out the product vision again. So it definitely was a lengthy like process. It's almost as, yeah, you're starting back at zero again.
Yeah, yeah, of course. And I know that many entrepreneurs seek and understand, because if you read the most basic entrepreneurship books, everything is about pivoting, everything is
Yeah.
about getting your business model so flexible that then you are able to move forward to the next thing, and then you don't invest a lot of time on things until you have things validated. But yeah, how that process of taking your initial business model and moving it to the right or to the left or to the back or wherever, it takes some time and mental effort, because you have put a lot of effort, you have invested a lot of time in that idea, your mind is set on that idea or in that project, you have some evidence, you've been backed by accelerators, by investors, by even users, and then something tells you that you need to change this. That's a disruption on itself. So I think it is said lightly that entrepreneurs should pivot, while, as you said it, I do think that much more people should be speaking about their pivoting problems or pivoting challenges, because it's not a frictionless process.
Yep. No, I mean, there were times, obviously, like we started working on that, and we also put a little bit of pressure on us because obviously, like, we can't just search for an idea for like 6 months or how long it takes. Like, you obviously have the timing pressure, um, and we would have had a demo day from Alchemist, the Silicon Valley based accelerator program. Their demo day was 2 weeks ago from the class that we were in, and they were kind enough because we talked to them. We said, listen, it's a demo day in front of like 100 or 200 like of the most well-known investors from Silicon Valley, but also worldwide, and funds. And we were like, listen, we can't really go in there because we currently have no idea what we're doing. We could just give like a really vision based of the overall vision based pitch, but it was kind of like the chances were against our favors, like the odds were so against us. And we talked to them, we said, like, obviously this is like a big milestone and we don't want to lose it, but we can't pitch the initial business model because we kind of like decided to, let's put it that way, to kill that. But we also don't really have a direction we're going in right now. And by that time, obviously we had like a direction, but it wasn't a well thought out business model that you could present to an investor. And they were kind enough to say, okay, you can defer it, you can pitch with the next class, which is in May. And I think that relieved a lot of pressure. But there were so many times, like after 2 months, where Oana and I felt like we were in this pivoting limbo, because obviously I think you also have the pressure when you pivot once. You don't want to, like, initially, if you don't finish your pivot process and you don't really think about it, you're like, oh, this has to be that set now, this is something like this has to work now, and this has to be like perfect. So I think redeciding on what you're doing during a pivot is also a really hard part, because you've experienced, like you said, like this like disruptive and also difficult time of pivoting. So your initial, and I think that's like human nature, your initial reaction is, I don't want to do that again. So kind of like trying to push that away and be like, we're focusing on this now, but if we test it and in 2-3 months, if we realize it's not going to work, we're a startup, we're flexible, we're agile, we can pivot again. Like that, installing that mindset was really difficult. But yeah, I mean, I think like it was really good for us. We had a good support system of people. But yeah, I would have loved, we had one founder that we talked to, and she was like, yeah, we had also, there was like times where I just felt like we were just stumbling around, and I just couldn't see the end of it. But she said, and then randomly it just pops up and you're like, that makes so much sense, how did I not see this before? And it was the exact same thing that happened to us. Like, we had interviews and each interview gave us a little bit of a breadcrumb, but it took like this final, like a final interview or like another interview to put all the pieces together and like put it together with glue. And then we looked at it and we were like, this makes total sense. How, like, it took us 3 months to figure that out, but obviously, like, it's a journey to get there. But it's very funny. I'm pretty sure other people that pivot will say the same thing, that you look back and you're like, why did I put so much pressure on myself, and why was I so anxious about it, because now it all makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, definitely, definitely. And if we go back before that pivot, before that process where you started, so 3 months before that started, um, and when the lockdowns still were not and still were not in that strict, and you were trying to sell and launch the app, did you at some point think about what did failure look like, or did you envision some point that, yeah, this might not work, or this might be something that gets pushed out, or did you think about that?
Um, I mean, yeah, you always have in the back of the mind that your startup might not work. And I think for us, failure would have looked like, before we knew that we needed to pivot, for us, failure would have been, we launch it and we have like initial success with the test, or people wouldn't use the app as much as we envisioned it, or as much as like we needed it to be successful. So that was kind of like the fact that like the growth of it, or kind of like afterwards we realized people might not see the appeal as much as like the first, like the pioneers, the first users. I think that in that sense was like failure. Or I mean, failure could also be you plan to expand, and randomly at the same time, because you don't know what people are working on, somebody brings out the exact same like idea that you have, and in that market, or even in your market, they have like a competitive advantage, or they're just faster and have more money.
Hmm.
So we always had that in mind. But to be completely honest, we really didn't think about pivoting up until this point. Like it came,
Okay.
obviously, like I said, we had like these problems that we looked at, but we were like, we can definitely like push over them, kind of like make it work. And we had such great initial feedback. I mean, we got into two very competitive programs like Alchemist. There were roughly like 800 people applying and 20 startups got in. So,
Hmm.
and that was, I mean, obviously we didn't have any traction at that point, so people really believed in like our vision and in our product. We also got like initial investment. We
Okay.
started, like I said, we started partnerships even with like big companies who said, yes, this is something we want to be associated with. We had really good responses from drivers. I mean, at one point when we did initial like market research, we send out a survey to figure out what EV drivers are thinking. And within 24 hours, we got over 500 responses, which was wild. So kind of like from a market point of view, or even from a user point of view, like things were going great. And we had so much like validation and momentum that I think everybody around us was a little bit shocked when, like, I mean, we didn't announce it right away because you don't want to be like, so we're killing this business model, but we have no idea what we're doing. But yeah, bear with us. But kind of like when I started talking to friends, and we started talking to like people that we've worked with, they were all like, but you had users and like what happened? And obviously like they understood with the lockdown, but I think like everybody was a little bit shocked because it just seemed like this idea was going to go so far.
Okay.
And it just was like, it was the timing and the pandemic and everything that just pushed it aside, but it's fine.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm really curious because, yeah, you're getting this validation from users, and then you move forward to these partnerships. You also get an investment. You're seeing the growth that every entrepreneur wants to see in their project. And then lockdown starts again, and you have this conversation with the mentor from the accelerator. And yeah, do you decide, yeah, we need to pivot. This is something that we cannot pursue in the current state. And when you're telling that to your friends and the people around them, they're shocked. But how are you feeling? What was the emotional response that you had to that?
I mean, it was hard, to be honest. I'm not gonna lie. Like, first of all, like the decision process to do it, like, you know, you like deep down know it's the right thing to do, but at the same time you're so scared because you only know this business model, and we had such good like positive reviews. So there were so many times where I was like, we made the biggest mistakes of our lives. Like, why did we pivot? Like, why are we going into this uncertainty? um and yeah, I mean, it kind of like, to be honest, it feels like a breakup, or like, I don't know, I mean, I'm young, I don't have children, so I can't speak on that part, but it's like, it feels like you put so much effort in that, and the startup is kind of like your child, so it's like losing someone that's important to you. So kind of like I mean, we still talk about like eve version 1 versus eve version 2 now, but like we're still like emotionally attached to like the first initial idea, because that's what it like that's what got the ball rolling.
Yeah.
So like the whole process, I mean, it's sort of a grieving process, to be honest. Like you have all the stages of grief. You have like denial,
Mhm.
and then you're angry. And then you have the point where you're like I said, I even told my co-founder, I was like, we should maybe just go back to it. And she said the same, but luckily, like both of us, while the other one was like panicking, like the other person was in the right mind, was saying, no, we like have to get through this.
Mhm.
But yeah, I mean, we're now super accepting of it, and we understand like this was the right step to move forward. But yeah, it is a hard process. And then at the same time, you kind of have the confusion. I think we were also afraid of what are we going to say to tell like the people that were associated with like the product or the startup. What are we going to tell the partners? We had like investors that we talked to before that were super interested in like at demo day or at that time when we started the first round to invest. Like I think it was like the scary part is you don't know if the people are gonna agree with what you're doing, and you might lose a couple of important people or like partnerships. But so far we've had like really good responses, even from investors who we talked to, who said it's actually like the best thing if a startup even before the first round of investment is pivoting, because it shows that you can actually analyze the market to an extent, and you're not afraid to, if it's not perfect, to find something better or to refine that. Where they say they find it hard to believe when somebody pitches in front of them and they have a startup for like 3 years and they've gotten to a certain stage but they never pivoted.
Mhm.
um Whereas yeah, one investor actually like said it really well. He said it's actually a validation of how capable the team is to run a startup, because he said like now I wouldn't be afraid to like put my money um into you and to put my faith into you, because I know you've already pivoted and you've done this really crucial step. And with others, I would be afraid that as a major shareholder in the company or with their money, I would have to pursue them and I have to tell them, listen guys, I think you're running this against the wall. So I think that's very important. But when you start this whole process, nobody tells you. So that's something I wish there was just like a major things to know before pivoting, like a to-do list or like a checklist where it's like, it's actually positive, or like it's like affirmations for a positive pivot or something like that. So because it is very uncertain. And a lot of people, if it's like their first venture, they'd be super confused like we were. But
Of
yeah,
course.
I mean, looking back at it now, I'm like, I could have saved myself a lot of like stress and anxiety and just like the pressure on myself had I known all these things that I know now. But I mean, it's in a lot of stages of your life, it's like the same thing.
And I question whether if it's possible to get this to-do list or this information for you to make like a simple pivot, because I
Yeah,
think it's such a personal
yeah,
experience that you need to face. And of course you can read about people who pivoted, of course you can read about the process, and of course the people who are listening to your story can get a lot of insights of what they should expecting. But I think that is, and I mean, especially in your case, because things were going great. I mean, you get the validation, you get the market, just that the context was not suitable for this.
yeah,
Many founders experience the other way around. Many founders found that their idea is not validated or the market is not validated. And sometimes they are too in love with the idea and they have invested a lot of time and money, and it's really hard for them to actually move forward to other place. So in your experience, what's much more harder, because everything was going right, everything was going towards the plan. So and many founders that I have spoken with have told me that to get through this grieving process or to get through these hardships and to get overcome this process, that they relied a lot in their emotional support and in their family and in their friends, and also they took care of themselves. But why don't you tell me more about what did you do?
yeah. I mean, I think it's like German culture might be a little bit different. I don't know if you've
Okay.
interviewed somebody from Germany, but here pivoting or like failure, especially in the startup world, is still like a taboo topic.
Okay.
I actually, when I was working before, we organized I don't know if you've heard of it, a fuck up night, where
Yeah.
people come in and talk about their failures.
Mhm.
And it's like it's usually such a big event and you have like thousands of people attending, but it's still like it's and I find it so funny because like these events or people talking about it are needed, because like
Mhm.
like I said, in Germany, if you fail, like it's always like people will kind of like hold it against you, or it's not seen as like a learning process per se. It's more of a like, oh yeah, this person kind of fucked up, and they're gonna live with that for the rest of their lives. So I think it was a little bit harder for me to rely on like family and friends. And funnily enough, I think it really shows I only told my parents about the pivot recently. I only confided in like my family at a point where we kind of like knew where it was going, because it felt shameful to me to kind of like accept or tell that, well, this wasn't going to work. Because I think as Germans, culture wise, we put a lot of expectations on us and other people. So I kind of felt like, in a sense, even though my parents are the most supportive ever, like they've never doubted anything that I'm doing startup wise, and they've always been so supportive, and really understanding, and also not involved in a sense, but they really wanted to know what's going on. And they were also emotionally very supportive. But even though I knew they wouldn't judge me, I still had like this underlying fear where I was like, oh God, they will be like, of course our daughter failed. So I mean, which is stupid, but that's how it is. I think we confined a lot more into the startup ecosystem, and kind of like the people we were working with, and we like the group we were involved with the accelerator program,
Mhm.
because kind of like those people get it.
Okay.
Whereas, I mean, it's a funny story, because when we decided to pivot, I talked to my flatmate,
Mhm.
because it was like we had brunch right after, and she was like, "Oh, so what happened today?" And I just said, "I think we're killing Eve." Which, now that I say it, it sounds like we're killing a person. But yeah, in that sense, I was like, I think we're killing like the idea. And she was really confused, because she's like, but you have your like initial investments, you have your users, you have the partners, you're building your product right now. Like, what is happening?
Mhm.
So I think like also the fact that we had such positive
Mhm.
like experiences, and people around us, like our families, our friends, knew about how successful, like in a sense of like a early idea can be.
Mhm.
It was also hard to admit, well, this didn't work. But yeah, so but I eventually opened up, and I have to say it obviously really helped, because trying to like get through this without like the people you're close to is really hard, because I always felt like I had to hold it together, and I had to present this image of everything's going fine, where internally I'm like, oh God, I don't even know if like, what if we're completely closing down the company because we run out of money, or we just can't find an angle. So yeah, I kind of like spiraled a little bit internally, because like I had like one bad what if after another. And obviously now that I talk to people, and I talk to friends about it, like they obviously, like, it was a bit confusing for them, because they didn't understand the reason of why. But when like you talk about COVID and everything, it makes sense.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's like from like a background part, I think it was probably a little bit harder than for other founders. But yeah, I'd say that like, even if it's co-founders, or like people you work with, or like the mentors,
Mhm.
it was really helpful, because it actually turned out like a lot of them had experienced something similar so far. And that was helpful to know, because I feel like sometimes when you start pivoting, you feel like you're all alone, and you feel like you're kind of like doing this. And obviously it makes sense, like as a startup, you wouldn't really publish your bad experiences or your bad news per se. So all you read is like, successful, we launched, we did this, we received money. And I'm just like, can we have like a secret group chat or something where we just like, I don't know, people talk about like their bad experiences or like their hardships. And we actually did that at Alchemist Accelerator,
Okay.
because I think a lot of founders were, because of COVID, like struggling maybe financially, or also they had people, like they had loved ones that got COVID, or they were stuck in an environment at home where they were sharing a flat with somebody and they didn't have a workspace. So at one point, it wasn't us, but another founder actually said, because usually there was this thing, this like weekly get together, and it was like, oh, tell like the best things that happened today or like this week. And like one founder essentially was like, can we switch this and actually talk about like the things we're struggling with? Because whenever I hear this, I feel so anxious, because I can't compare to what people were doing. And then we started talking about it. And even like the companies where we were like, they're doing amazing, they're like skyrocketing, they were like, actually, we're having a really hard time right now. So it was good to know, because if you feel like you're failing alone, it's very difficult. But kind of like not having to compare yourself to others and being like, we're actually all in the same boat, was, I think, like the part where I was like, it clicked for me, and I was like, it's fine, I can manage this.
And this is exactly why I'm having and opening this space for people to come here and have the courage to tell their stories, their hardships, what they're facing. And I really admire the courage that it takes for you to be here and tell your story. Because yeah, in my experience, I also faced failure. Really, it wasn't because of COVID, it was because of other stuff that happened to me and my company. But I felt as if, yeah, it feels like that. It feels as if you're failing alone in a way.
Yeah.
And in understanding that there are other people and other founders who are also failing because of different reasons, because even perhaps the similar reasons, it gives it this other perspective of much more human side of entrepreneurship, which is something I believe we should truly empower.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I really appreciate the courage that it takes to be here from you and telling your story after everything that happened. And now I'm interested in learning what what has changed in Sarah. So how was Sarah before Eve started, when you were starting this program, and how is Sarah right now?
I mean, I think it's obvious that when you start, I think, like, I wouldn't say it was like 100% naive going into this, but to an extent, like, I had experience working with startups and working with really early stage projects, and so I had exposure to what could happen, or like how the process was. But I
Mhm.
think I am now much more analytical in a way, and I feel like I put a lot more value on like small problems that I encounter in a business model or in like a go-to-market strategy or something. Whereas before, like I said, we were like, oh, this is fine, we can work with this because we have so much positive responses. Whereas now I would be like, okay, we really need to get to the bottom of this, because if we keep dragging this along, it will become just a lot bigger. Um, but yeah, also before, even though I had organized a fuck up night, and I was exposed to people that were talking about how their failure was actually helpful to them, I was still in the exact mindset of, oh no, like if you fail with your startup, that's it. Like you, in a sense of, you cannot leave your house again, or you kind of like need to figure out a story how to sell this to people so they won't judge you. Whereas now I feel like it didn't only grow the company, but it also grew me as a person. I feel like I'm a lot more like balanced in how I am as an entrepreneur. And like I also understand the process a lot more. And now I'm like I'm on here, I'm talking about how we failed with our idea, whereas I was scared to tell my parents 2 months ago that we essentially had to kill the idea and work on something else. um, yeah, and I think my mindset now is that pivoting is actually necessary in a company. I feel like it should be a lot more concerning if you don't have a point where you need to pivot, to whatever extent you need to pivot. Like you don't even have to change your full business idea, but I think it should be more concerning if like the route you're taking doesn't have any hurdles and you're just going along, because then I feel like you're probably ignoring warning signs or something. um and yeah, I am pretty sure, to be honest, at this point I'm pretty sure that Eve will pivot again. um Maybe small, maybe big, but I think it's just part of the company growth at this point. And I think now that I've gone through the process, I also know what it looks like. And so the next time, if that happens, or maybe if in the future there's another project, and like this project will also have to do a massive pivot where you essentially change your DNA, your company DNA completely. I know that like the initial anxiety and the initial like feeling of being completely lost is totally fine, but also that like things will get better. It's not going to stay that way. So I think I wish I could actually either turn back time and know what I know now, or I wish I could just talk to my like self from a year ago and be kind of like, listen, yeah, I'm going to call her and be like, listen, Sarah, this is going to happen. And like, you're gonna have a rough time, but essentially, like, look at what's happening now.
And I also believe that if you are moving in entrepreneurship and you don't pivot, um, you need to improve your business model. You need
Yeah,
to create upselling for your products, for your customers. You also need to go to different markets. So in a way, you could frame those type of initiatives as
yeah,
pivoting. Um,
exactly.
the only different thing is that, yeah, you are not touching the core business per se. You're just pivoting towards a new market or identifying and creating new things. But yeah, I think I agree with you in a sense that if you are traveling a path that everyone seems to have issues and find hardships, and you're not finding any hardships or any hurdles, I would be doubtful. I would just take a
Yeah,
step. And I am not saying that you should be paranoid that everything is going to go wrong, that you need to pay attention to everything. But definitely, if you feel that everything is going great, just take a step back and analyze.
yeah,
And if everything is going great, amazing. Take that
yeah,
energy and move forward, but just take the moment to analyze what are the things that
yeah.
might not be going towards the plan as you were envisioning initially.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's probably like one of the like biggest parts of being an entrepreneur, like the most important one is being analytical and also trying to like not like you merge yourself with your business or your idea. Like you still have to like jump outside of it or take an outside look and like look at it with fresh eyes or from a different perspective, because even if you think everything's going great, if you maybe look at it from a different angle, you might find you might not even have to pivot, but you just might find an area of improvement which just will just accelerate your growth or your success. So I think that's very important to like keep that mindset of I'm going to be analytical, I'm going to analyze the environment and the market, etc., etc.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. 100% agree with you on that. And so now you have gone through all of these experiences. You have overcome every challenge, which I believe we will have to face more challenges in the future, but
Exactly.
we are right now much more prepared, much more resilient. Now you know how pivoting looks like, and you pivoted towards this new business model, which in which you are focusing on reporting the consuming I'm sorry, the amount of electricity that is being consumed in the grid in specific spots, so you can pivot this. But tell me more about how this Eve 2.0 look for the next 12 and 24 months.
Hmm. I mean, we're currently working on really refining what the product should look like. And we're still not 100% sure if we want to have it as more as a smart city solution
Mhm.
or more as a solution for property development. But at this point, we're just looking at which would be like the best partner to start, because I think in the future, like both of them would be relevant. But yeah, I mean, so far we want to, for the beginning, want to just have a dashboard that can kind of like monitor but also predict
Okay.
electricity consumption. So we can say, obviously we need like user data from that first, but then we want to create this tool that can essentially say, listen, tomorrow around this time, based on how your users are charging, you will have an exponential peak. So either in the beginning, obviously you can't have all the functions in the beginning, they might have to take different measures to kind of like balance that, where they say, for example, we're doing price monitoring, kind of like price sensitivity, stuff like that. But then yeah, essentially we want to move, and hopefully we can do that within like the next 1 or 2 years. We want to really build a solution that can just on autopilot, based on the predictions being made, just switch on and off chargers without a big impact on the end user, but just to make charging more efficient and greener. And our timeline at the moment is, obviously this is a little bit more complex than the initial business model we had.
Mhm.
So like for this year, we really want to just work on refining a product and then also really going back into product testing before we start building it. But also create partnerships. We want to build a customer advisory board where we invite potential future customers to kind of like build the product with us, where we still build it, but you can kind of like talk to them monthly and they give feedbacks. Hopefully can get some pilot customers. And then yeah, we have the demo day in May. So for that, kind of like having agreements with partners and initial pilot customers, even though the pilot isn't running, would be great. And then our timeline from now on would then be kind of like develop it to be launched beginning of next year, and then have the testing period, and then kind of like after the initial MVP, kind of like add in more features. But I think a very interesting, and I think also a very exciting part is now that we have the software as a service solution, essentially, we are a lot more country agnostic. So we don't have to focus on go-to-market strategy specifically to capture a lot of users in a certain area. So I think the opportunities and the possibilities are a lot bigger. So that's kind of like what we're doing. But I mean, we're still in the pivot. It's not like the pivot is done yet. There's still stuff to do. So yeah, we still need to refine the strategy of like how exactly will the timeline look like, because those are just like rough milestones that we want to achieve, but like has to be more refined. But I think, yeah, our biggest to do at the moment, or like our biggest want that we want to get, is really getting like 3 or 4 companies that are kind of like a customer advisory board. So yeah, they can, with their feedback, we can create this amazing product.
And I really like that your perspective on this is that you're still working on the same problem, right? And I also loved something that you wrote while you were applying to this, that it says, fall in love with the product and not with the solution.
Yeah.
That helps you pivot. And I always say, and I really like this about Simon Sinek. He has this book, Start with Why, and why doing things, and don't focus on the how and the what, but focus on the why. But there was one thing that I saw from him that really resonated with me, and that is that if you find your why and that becomes your center,
Yep.
then you can pivot around your why, and you're still working on that problem to find several solutions to achieve that path. And I think that mindset, at least on my perspective, can help you pivot much more faster.
Yeah. I mean, because I think we essentially saw it that at a point with like the initial version with Eve, we were more in love with the solution than the problem. And that actually, I don't know where a professor got this from, but it was one of the professors at Trinity who said it. It kind of became a mantra for the entire course. And it makes sense, because your solution could be as great as it gets, if you're not actually like fully 100% hitting the sweet spot with your users and really solving their problem. Like, what is your solution gonna do?
Sarah, thank you for telling me your story. Thank you for having the courage of coming here. And I know you have a different mindset right now, but it is really admirable to be here, speak about the hardships, speak about everything that you went through, even in your position, because you were having such good validations and such good position, and taking that decision to pivot must have been really hard. And I can tell the people who are listening and people who are watching can make some empathy with you and understand that what you face and what you did is really, really admirable. So thank you for being here.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for having me. I think when I read about the podcast and what you're doing, first, I was like, this is actually something that's super, super important. And I think that will help a lot of people, because to be honest, if I had known about your podcast when I was pivoting, I'm pretty sure I would have listened to all episodes in one night, just to be sure, and just to like get the validation there are other people out there facing like the exact same thing, or like at least pivoting. And just hearing their stories, I think, is really helpful. And I hope that people that are listening, not just to this episode, but to the other, that they can kind of like understand it a little bit better, but also kind of like get the validation that what they're doing and pivoting or even failing is currently the right thing to do.
Yeah, definitely. All right, thanks.
Perfect. Thank you.
Mentors play a key role in entrepreneurship, as founders can benefit a lot from someone who can help them and guide them to navigate the challenges they'll find in their journey. Not only because different experiences and knowledge can help you overcome the hardships, but also because sometimes we as founders tend to get so involved in our projects that we have a hard time to see a different perspective. This can happen even if things are going according to plan, and a fresh mind always can help to see an improved perspective on how to tackle challenges. That's why it's important for founders to seek help from mentors. And also, seek help from other founders. This is truly important because the fact that you don't feel as if you are the only one experiencing those hardships and you are not the only founder facing those similar experiences can make this process easier. In reality, other founders face similar challenges and experiences as you are facing and can provide a fresh perspective. Many times, their insights are much more valuable than your friends or colleagues who are not founders and have different life experiences. Sarah Marie knew this very well, and she was really lucky to have mentors who helped and guided her projects towards the right path right from the very beginning. But also finding a community of founders who are openly speaking about their struggles, helping her to relieve a lot of pressure from the challenges she was facing. So, if you're a founder, seek help from mentors and also from a community of entrepreneurs who are willing to help you out. But most importantly, don't be afraid to share your hardships or your struggles. You will find that people will be really happy to help you out and give you insights you never imagined.
Thank you for watching. Our goal is to help founders see failure from a different perspective. If you like this episode, remember to like the video and let us know in the comments what have you learned from failure. Are you interested in learning more? You can check our Patreon for exclusive content and subscribe to our mailing list for weekly updates. You will find the links for that in the description of this video. Remember to subscribe to our channel to receive notifications when we publish new videos.